right, so thank you for joining us in our hashtag Universal Asian Voices, Letting Go of the Unknown with Kara Voss. It's great to see everyone. And before we begin, and I introduce Kara, who probably doesn't need too much of an introduction, I just want to give you a brief about the Universal Asian in case this is your first time with us or just to refresh about who we are. The Universal Asian is an open and safe online platform aiming to provide inspiration to Asian adoptees and hyphenated Asians around the world. We strive to mainstream discussions on any and every topic that helps make our community of Asian voices universally heard. It is our aim to bring people together. So please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to be interviewed or want to share something of your own or even collaborate on a future event like this. Also, as I said, this event is being recorded. You should have ticked your consent or request to be edited when you signed up. So please feel free to participate freely. You can show your video, you can turn it on, but we'll be responsible for any edits according to your requests. If you have any questions as we go along or you want to make some comments, please use the chat. You can also raise your hand under the Zoom options down at the bottom of the taskbar. There's a reaction button and you can interact that way if you'd like. And I'll try to monitor the chat side of things while Kara is leading the event. So let's get started. So if you're not familiar with Kara Voss, I'm just going to give a quick one-liner and then she will introduce herself. But she is a Korean-American adoptee who now lives in Amsterdam with her partner and 2 children. And so without further ado, I'm passing the mic to you, Kara.
Hi, everyone. I thank you for taking the time to join. And I hope that it'll be a fruitful event and conversation will be meaningful. And please feel free to jump in at any time and ask questions. I'd rather this be more of a conversation than just me speaking all the time. So please feel free to make any comments or ask any questions that you would like to. I will give maybe just a short synopsis of my story since a few of you already know it, but since a couple of you don't, then I can at least tell you, and it'll give you a basis from where the topic of this event is coming from. So I was adopted in 1984 and to America, and I was raised in a Caucasian family. So my parents, and they have 2 older biological children of their own, and I'm the youngest. And we lived in a very rural part of Michigan. So I think I was one of maybe 3 Asians, and the other 2 were also adopted as well. And I think I have a very stereotypical story of growing up in a Caucasian environment and not being I would say at all submersed in any kind of Asian environment or any kind of relation to my culture or heritage. I was raised very American because my parents were also told to do that since they received me from Korea. They just basically told them to, have her forget her past and just raise her as American as possible. So that's what they did. And I was quite a fighter. So I was adopted when I was supposedly on my paperwork, it says I was around 2, almost 3. But now I know that that's different, but I'll get back to that later. And I just kind of, went with the flow. I did pretty well in school and I worked hard and I tried to fit in, and I didn't face at least what I knew to be any kind of racism at that point. I know now that it actually was, but I think in general, in most adoptive families, you're kind of told that, don't be so sensitive, or it doesn't mean anything. And, the typical squinty eyes. And my brother used to tell me that I ran into a door too much, and that's why my face was so flat. And that was just kind of a common joke in our family. So, those kind of things is kind of what I've grown up with. I don't know, maybe you guys have had similar experiences or not. And getting moving on into college and adult life, I didn't really struggle with being adopted whatsoever. I just continued to be surrounded by Caucasian friends, and I tried to steer away, if I'm honest, with any kind of Asian environment possible. So I didn't have any Asian friends besides one. She was a fellow adoptee, but we never talked about being adopted from when we were both adopted at a young age, and we went to the same church together. So and I think we probably became friends just because, we were obviously the only ones that looked like each other, and we would play a lot of times that we were twins and sisters and dress up the same, but without recognizing the fact that it had probably to do with what we look like. And it wasn't until a lot later. So I'm now 40. I just turned 40 this year, unfortunately, or fortunately. And my daughter, when she was around the age that that it was stated in my paperwork that I was 2. So when she turned 2 is when it really hit me about how much it means for a 2-year-old to be abandoned and separated from your biological mother. Because at 2, my daughter was speaking full sentences, and she really had a relationship and a bond, a very strong bond with me. And so it just made me realize that, they always told me being a baby, it doesn't affect you. And, as long as you catch them before they're 3, then they'll be, healthy, and they won't be so traumatized, and they won't have any after effects of, the adoption and the trauma surrounding that. So that's kind of what I always believed, until I faced the reality of the true mother-daughter bond that you have with your own child. And so that's when I started delving into my past, and I ended up doing a DNA test. I did birth family search, going back to South Korea, putting flyers up on the walls, and going back to the place that I was found and abandoned, and speaking with local police, pretty much hitting up any organization that could try to help me to find my birth mother. And she was the only focus I had. I never had any ideas of looking for my birth father or any extended family at that point. I could only focus on my birth mother. And it was very unsuccessful. Like, there was no information in my file. It says that I was abandoned and father unknown, mother unknown, and no family. And so then I went back again the next year. And this time I decided to look more into, where I stayed, because in my papers, it says that I stayed in a foster home for a few months. So I figured if I was 2 and staying with a foster mother, then I might have maybe said something about my birth family. And so I searched for my foster mother. And in 2018 is when I did that. And that's when I found her, my foster mother. And she actually told me that the orphanage had called them and told them that an American family were looking for a 2-year-old, and that they would be better off sending me back to the orphanage. And she also told me that they had tried to adopt me, and there was paperwork to actually prove that as well. So that's when kind of the flip side of adoption, because I had been up until that point very positive. Like I'd always said, I'm so, that stereotype, maybe story that many of you might have also felt of, I'm so grateful that I was adopted, and my parents are, just wonderful that they rescued me from the streets of Korea, and I would have just been this poor, little orphan. And, and my mother couldn't have cared for me because she might have been a single mother, and the stigmatism surrounding that was told to my parents that, that wasn't accepted in Korea. So that was kind of always my thought process as well. And I thought when I got older, I would also want to pay it back and adopt children myself. And I actually had met an adoptee here in the Netherlands before I went back on my first search. And she had kind of given me also a bit of the dark side of adoption. She had told me, that a lot of the files are fabricated. A lot of adoptees come back realizing that their stories aren't true, that the doorstep story or the curbside story or found at a bus station isn't true. And I didn't believe her. Like, I was just like, what? No, I mean, that has to be like the rare occasion. That can't be true. And, I still had this idea that Holt, my adoption agency, was very pure, and they're a Christian organization. There's no way they could do anything as, evil as stealing children from, single mothers or pushing for adoption. And so, but then when the reality of my situation hit me, and I realized that the domestic adoption was actually stopped because the orphanage could earn more money by obviously sending me abroad. It started to make me obviously rethink that whole adoption story. And I think that was a very difficult moment, because, you know, you build, I think, your whole life story, you know, and you justify also the whole background to like why you were abandoned and why you were adopted to that story, to be able to kind of push through it and to accept it and understand the fact that, you know, why you were abandoned. And then when you hear that maybe an organization has made money off of you, I think that's like the first step that I had to do in letting go again, because there was a huge bitter confrontation. And I was very angry when I heard that. And when I got back from Korea after that time, because I didn't find my mother on that search either, I was so angry. And even like now, obviously, like, you know, I get emotional about it because it was such a, just, I think, turning point in my life as well, because I'd always been so positive about adoption, and it couldn't fathom the fact that, you know, that this side of adoption could be real, and that I could be involved, and that could be my story as well. And after that point, like, it just became more of a I think turning point to where I decided, like, okay, I'm gonna start looking more into my identity as a Korean, because I'd never done that before either. What does it mean to be Asian? What does it even mean, my life? Because, you know, from what I had believed up until this point, it was just a lot of ways it was lies. And what is my story then? If it's not that story that my mom was too poor, that adoption agencies weren't helping, but they were actually profiting, what is my story? So after that point, I kind of actually just gave up on looking for her and just tried to deal with this huge, you know, turn in my perspective. And that was really hard. Like, I started seeing a therapist as well. I saw her for almost a year, actually, every week. And I just delved into all the emotions surrounding my abandonment, my identity. I really confronted a lot of the stuff I think that I'd really buried deep and just thought always very carelessly about, and thinking that it never affected me. But that it made me realize a lot of things about what has made me who I am and why I became the person I am. And I don't know if any of you have had that as well, if you've delved at all into your past yet, or if you're still on that journey. But even though it was very painful, it was also very rewarding, because I was really able to understand, like, why I was so, I think, independent, distrusting, also not willing to like let people in and help me. I really had this like overachieving side of me as well, of always trying to prove myself and win people's love by action, of like, I had to be sure that I was like the most loved by my actions in order to feel loved. And if I didn't have that, then you know, then I didn't feel loved because I hadn't earned it. And so a lot of those things of like that pure, what I feel for my kids, for example, that pure unconditional love, I never felt from my mother, my adoptive mother. And that's a whole nother story in and of itself. But a lot of those things were definitely dealt with during that therapy. And so it helped me to realize, like, and I think come to terms with who I am as Kara Boss now. And I'm really grateful because I wanted to do that for my children as well, because I didn't want to obviously pass on the baggage, I think, that I've been carrying up until now, but without knowing it. Because I think a lot of us adoptees, since maybe we're not given that space to face it, we tend to just put it into our subconscious. But in our actions and how we interact with people, in the end, it comes out. And that's what I've definitely noticed in my journey through this process is that it's helping me to put limits. It's helping me to say no. It's also helping me to love myself for who I am and not feel that the only way to receive that love is to earn it. And so throughout that therapy, like, even though I have to say, like, my therapist, she wasn't the greatest, but it was more the fact that every week I was kind of confronted to have to talk about it. So I had 1 hour a week where I had to actually think about it, because I'm very good at pushing everything away. I'm very good at keeping myself busy so I don't have to think about it, and I don't have to talk about it. I don't have to do anything about it. And so that really forced me to do that. And so it was fantastic. So if any of you aren't in therapy or struggle at all or think that it's useless, I have to, by my own testimony, it's definitely helpful. Even if the therapist isn't that great, I think just by sitting and being forced to confront it is very helpful. So anyway, then I had the miracle. I received a DNA match, and he ended up being my half nephew. It's a long story. To keep it short, I built a relationship with him. He was a match. He lived in Oxford. He was going to school there. And he helped me kind of put together his family tree. He had no idea about me and how I was related. He just did the DNA test as a whim with a college roommate. And so for him, it was a real shock to have such a high match. And we were 1,188 centimorgans, so it's like 17%, if any of you have had DNA matches or know anything about it. And that's quite high, because most DNA matches you receive are like third to fifth cousins, and it doesn't mean anything. And so through him, I was able to piece together the family tree. I built a relationship with him. He came here, I went there. I managed to kind of narrow it down to 2 people who could be my family. Either his aunt was my mother or his grandfather was my father. But his family didn't want anything to do with me. They didn't trust me. They thought I was, kind of a crazy scammer. And so in the end, they shut everything down. And so he did at least keep talking to me, but all of his family basically said, like, if you want to talk to her, you can, but we don't want anything to do with her. But in the end, I went to Korea, and through the information I'd received for him, I was able to Google, and I was kind of a detective, and I found out their names. I found out, what they were doing in occupation and where they worked in Korea. I managed to meet his cousin in Korea as well, and she gave me actually names and birth dates, so then I could research it even more. I tried to use local police in Korea, but that was fruitless because of the Privacy Act, so they wouldn't help me. And they kept asking me to prove the fact that this man is your father, and then we could contact him. But of course, I didn't have any proof. And so in the end, as a last resort, I actually begged at my oldest assumed half-sister's doorstep on my knees and asked her just to open the door and to talk to me. But she refused and called the police. So I experienced that as well. And that was also a very low point in my journey. And I think that that's something also adoptees don't really talk about as much either, is how lonely the birth search journey is. Because, you have to constantly be the one to push forward. You have to be the one constantly to decide whether or not to take another step. And there's not really anyone who truly can understand and support you in that, because your friends, of course, if you have fellow adoptee friends, they can, but still every adoptee journey and story is different. So as I walked away from that apartment building after being sent away by the police, I really kind of just decided, okay, I really give up now. Like there's no way I'm going to be able to connect with the family. There's no way that I'm going to be able to, talk to my assumed father. So I did my best. What more can you do besides beg at someone's doorstep? I never dreamed I would do that either. And that's something else. You don't even have a clue when you start, I think, birth family search, like what you're going to face. Because I definitely didn't. And I would have never imagined myself doing the things that I had done. And so then I filed the paternity suit. I found out via that I could do that. I did that in November 18th, 2019. And that was actually the date that I was found in the parking lot. So it was very ironic that the day that I was abandoned or found was also the day that I kind of, I guess, fought back as an adoptee. And that was empowering, I have to say, to be able to feel like I could do something. And of course, I didn't know I would win or if I would be able to accomplish anything through that. But I did, and he was forced to take a DNA test because everything pointed to him being my father. And he took the DNA test in March or April. We got the results the following year, 2020. And then in June was the trial, and that's when I won the paternity suit. And he was forced by the court to claim me as his daughter and recognize me as his daughter. And I was put on his family registry. And it's funny because when I started that paternity suit, and those were kind of like the minor details of what would come with the lawsuit. My lawyer had told me this, but I didn't care about that. The only thing I cared about was just the proof. So I could go back to those police and all those organizations and say, hey, here's your proof. He's my father. Now do something. But that's also not, obviously how it works, because you can't force someone to meet you. And of course, I had the proof, so the police, they couldn't send me away anymore if I went to his doorstep. But in the end, I was able to have the meeting. But it was, it was eventful but uneventful because he didn't share any information, and he didn't recognize me as being his daughter. He completely denied it, and within 10 minutes, he left the room. And I was devastated again. And because it was really like kind of my last hope, I really thought if I finally got that meeting with him, then he would tell me. Then he would, he's 80, he was 85 at that point, almost 86, like that he would finally just tell me who she was if he didn't know anything, because he actually didn't even know that I was filing a lawsuit. His family didn't tell him. I was dealing only with his daughters and their husbands. And so he didn't find out until the Friday before we met, actually. Sorry, that's my kids, but my husband will let them in. So that was obviously, for, if you know anything about Asian culture at all, I'm sure for a very elderly man of 86 who had accomplished a lot in his life, that he wasn't so willing to maybe admit to something like that to his family, because it would be a very shameful thing to have this hidden secret come out if the rest of his family didn't know anything about it. So in some ways, it wasn't a surprise that he reacted, I guess, in the way that he did, even if it was very hurtful. And then I had to kind of, there was a big media storm at that time. And then I returned back to the Netherlands, and then my life had to continue, right? I had to move forward without the answers, after a tremendous fight, without any kind of true triumph. Because, it may seem like a triumph, obviously, that I could finally claim, that he was my father and that I'd won the lawsuit, but I didn't get, obviously, what I was trying to get. I was trying to find out who my mother was. So then I had to just move forward. And how do you do that? Because then, another thing happened is I found out in December that he had passed. So then I was, obviously devastated again, because 6 months after I met him, I thought, I'd hoped that as time maybe went on, as the media settled down, as the family adjusted and accepted the fact that I was his daughter, that I would have another chance to talk to him, and that he would give me the information. But then he died, and they didn't give me a chance. He'd been in the hospital actually since August. So I had met him in June. 2 months later, he went into the hospital, and he died in December, and they notified me after the funeral was finished. And that was obviously also another devastating blow, because I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to the man who had obviously created me. And the family, till the end, just treated me as a nobody. So it was a lot to handle, in a year's time. And you can tell, because obviously I'm still emotional, and people obviously also don't understand that, someone who I just met and lost and is my father is still a loss. And so, I would, of course, some people would say, I'm sorry for your loss, but you don't get treated as an adoptee for your biological father, something they don't really comprehend, as a typical, I guess, loss of a parent. Because I think they think that, he wasn't your real father in the sense, right? He didn't raise you. You didn't have a relationship with him. You didn't even truly know him. He treated you really bad, so you're better off, Just think about your family. Just think about what you have now. That's what's most important. And of course, a lot of that is true. But what people don't realize is that as an adoptee, like, there's no guidebook of how you deal with that either, right? How you deal with the fact that you finally find the person that that could maybe give you the answers to who and what happened at your origin. And then lose them after a very, terrible fight. I mean, obviously fighting a lawsuit is not something that you want to do in general as a person, right? And then to lose that person within 6 months, but not only that, to lose all the hope that lies with them because they could have given you the answers that you wanted. So that was a lot to deal with. And it's something that I'm still processing even now, because you're letting go. And that's why I've titled it as that, is letting go of something very unknown, because I do not know him. I only know bits and pieces of him, but I don't truly know him. I also still don't know my story of what happened and how he met my mother and who my mother is. And I'm also trying to let that go as well. And the only way that I truly do that is by confronting it, by sharing my story with others, to help them also realize that by sharing your story, you're stronger. By helping others to recognize that they're not alone, it's also what gives me hope and helps push me forward as well. Because I know I'm not alone in this. And I think for too long, we've not been allowed to be vulnerable like this. And because our pasts have been something that we've been told so many times to let go. But I truly think that the only way to really let go of your past is if you confront it. And confronting it has been for me also obviously very painful, but it's something that's helping me heal deep within. And otherwise, it's just been bottled up this whole time. And it's affected relationships without me really truly understanding and knowing why. And it's affected, I think even my relationships with my children. And so that's something that I didn't want. And that's why, for me at least, it's so important to understand how to let go of all of this stuff that's really out of my control. As much as I try, because I think as adoptees, that's something I've learned, is that's what we try to do. We try to control everything, because at the most vulnerable, raw moment, when we were young, we had no control. We couldn't control our situation. And so for the rest of our lives, I think we try to control everything surrounding us, because we don't want something as traumatizing as what happened to us when we were young to happen again. And so that's what I've been learning through my journey, through sharing my journey, is that letting go in this way could be a very powerful healing process. So I ended up talking a lot. So I would really love to hear from some of you. Maybe share also something that you've been dealing with, or how you've maybe let go of certain areas of your adoption journey, that we could help each other, because I'm definitely learning as I go as well. And I learned through hearing from you as well. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing your story. And I realized that I did know of it. I just didn't realize it. Once you started talking, you got to the end there, I realized that I had read like articles about your story, but I definitely didn't know all the details. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I think this is something that maybe I'm just starting to think about. I haven't actively done a birth parent search, but I've been thinking about it more and more. And I've done like the 23andMe, and I've put myself on like a poster where they have like, a picture of you as a baby and kind of thing that they'll distribute in your province, because I'm from China. And but I have thought about maybe hiring someone to actually look. But I think just the whole idea of searching is very daunting. And although it's scary to not know, like if you haven't tried, at the same time, I guess I'm also afraid of like what I might find. And I guess one question is like, if you could go back, like, would you still choose to search? Like, or would you have rather lived like, they say ignorance is bliss. So are you thinking that like you feel like you made the right decisions for yourself, and that, you'd rather go through that and then work on like healing and recovering kind of thing, and that it's worth it even if you didn't find that information, like you still have unanswered questions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've received it quite a few times, because, yeah, I mean, my story isn't the typical story, I think, in the birth family search. I have to say that sometimes I've definitely said that to myself. I've definitely said like, oh, if I'd done it all over again, I wouldn't be going through all of this hurt. I wouldn't be going through such difficulty. For sure. Ignorance was bliss before, I started all of this. I never would have dreamed that I would have gone through this kind of journey. But on the flip side as well, I have to say that yes, I would have done it all over again, because I don't regret searching for him, because if I never would have done it, I wouldn't know who he was. I would have never been able to meet him. I would have never been able to know who my father was, in the sense of more than just that, obviously he's my father, but it gives me a sense of empowerment, I think, too, as well as an adoptee, because, I didn't have the choice, obviously, to be abandoned by him, but I did have the choice to force him to recognize me before he passed away. And he did have to do that. Even if he didn't do it to my face, he did have to do it. And that was empowering, because I do feel, no matter what, especially as a parent myself, there is a responsibility to your children. If you've birthed them and you've, had any part of their lives whatsoever, that I do think and believe that you have a responsibility to at least tell them their story of origin. You don't obviously have to relive a relationship. Even biological children don't have, the most beautiful relationship with their parents. So I don't ask for that, but I do ask for the basic human recognition of knowing, where I come from and who I am. And I think also for my children, because it's important for me to be able to share with them about their Korean heritage, and to know more about my own DNA. And through him, I'm able to know that now. And a lot of things click in the sense of at least even knowing half of my story. So yes, I would do it all over again. Because now I can also say, that I am Okara, which is my Korean name in Korea, given to me by the Korean government again, but this time through me, because I made it happen. But I will also say, you have to be really obvious. I mean, you can't be prepared, because I obviously wasn't prepared for this either. But you do have to have a very strong support network around you. It's really important, because there are emotions and different things that you will experience that you won't know, I don't think, oftentimes how to handle. And even if it's just having someone there just to comfort you, it's really important to have, because you're delving into a space that maybe you've never confronted before. And obviously you also don't know where it's going. So it's something that you really have to take serious time and thought before you start, and recognize that it can also affect you for the rest of your life if you do decide to pursue it.
Yeah, go ahead, Sumi.
Just turn my video on from hi. Thank you so much, Kara, for sharing. It means a lot to hear your personal stories and also the emotions behind that. I'm still in a process of searching. So I did 2 DNA tests and waiting for an answer from NCRC, and have been withholding a little bit on really pushing more for it and going back to Korea. I've been back twice, and I have to say, like, every time, like the first time I felt more like a tourist, but the second time I was exploring beyond Seoul and just also going to the rural areas, just connecting more to the land. And that really affected me in a different way than the first time, like emotionally, and really feeling this, the loss really that I've like on a physical level also. And when you touched about therapy, for me also super helpful. In some ways, talk therapy or cognitive therapy, I felt always a bit limited, because so much is stored in the body that we are experiencing. And so just releasing through other modalities has been just so much more helpful for me. And especially when it comes to emotions, I think it's something, to not suppress them. I suppressed mine for a really long time. I was the acting in adoptee, like really just dissociating also, and not immersing into my own worlds, and not really talking about what I was actually really feeling. And only in the last years I've started to uncover and just all these layers, and also working on accepting that the shadow is part of who I am and part of my story. And it's okay that light always needs shadow and shadow needs light. So it's kind of it's a coexistence. And I feel like there's so many layers of who we are, what defines us, and in some ways I feel being an adoptee can be heavy, but at the same time, if I wouldn't have this shadow in my life, I would have never questioned myself in that way, like my identity, where I belong, and all these things. And I was really pushed into looking at myself. And I think the moment I opened up to myself was the healing. That's when the healing started, and just not being afraid to look. But yeah, what you also said, like we need to have a good support system around that, and to in terms of people that we feel safe with and that we can talk to. And yeah, and I think for me that was the reason why I also started a community with adoptees, to find that a sense of belonging and being validated and what we're going through. And yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I totally agree with you about it affecting your physical for sure, and that you do need a release, and a lot of times that even can be more powerful, I think, than also just like you said, this speaking with somebody. And yeah, I think it depends on you as well, you know, which is the better method of treatment. So I'm glad that you found that for yourself.
Yeah, and everyone, yeah, it's a lot about testing also what works, because we're so unique that not everything works for every person. So it's good to also test out and connect also with the therapist. Like I think that's super important, like to just have this to feel a connection. Yeah.
And I like what you also said about the fact that it also, you know, accepting the fact that it does exist, the light and the shadow, you know, and I think that's also part of it. I don't think you can expect that it's just going to go away and you're going to be healed and you're going to be, you know, so-called normal.
No, I think it's a lifelong
journey. It's a lifelong journey, and that's what I've learned as well, because I also sometimes think, okay, maybe next year, you know, everything will go back to normal again, or maybe the next, but then every year something, you know, new would happen and crazy and turn my life again upside down. And I was recently in Korea again through a documentary to search for my mother with SBS Truth. It's like this famous program in Korea. And so that happened this year, which I never experienced as well. So, you know, you just never know, just like the DNA match. I also never knew, you know, and that completely flipped everything upside down. So I think it's really also understanding, accepting that learning to live with it, but in a way that can be positive and affect your life positively. And I think like what Sami said, you as well, like learning, you know, setting up this adoptee group that she's able to share and have a network around her. That's definitely important as well.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say that so many things that were shared today resonate on such a deep level. I can't even begin to express it. So that's just very, very healing in itself. To share a bit of my own story, I am just 2 weeks post my second reunion. I met my birth mom for the first time in 2005. And it's a bit like what you said, Sonny. I went there, I was in my 20s. I was really a tourist, a Belgian tourist for that matter. And I was very overwhelmed. And I was in no space to really let everything that was unfolding at the time, to let that really enter in my heart. You know, I had a around the world ticket, I had a big backpack, I had a working visa for Australia. That was the kind of traveler I was at the time. So I was not ready. And so what happened was a failed reunion. I basically closed myself off. I wasn't able to let it in, and I continued my trip. And it took me 16 years to open the box again. And I think what made me participate to this call was the title, you know, letting go of the unknown, what I can share post reunion. And of course, I'm happy to say that the second time it was different and we were able to reconnect. But whereas in the first week when I was back in Switzerland and back to work and back being a mom, I was literally 1 inch taller, and I was very confident in my newly found Korean identity. This week is very different. I'm really struggling, I'm crying, I'm feeling down, and I realized, like what you guys are saying, it is lifelong. It's not because we reconnected the second time and it went well that now all is good. it's letting go of all the things that are lost forever and can never be recovered, even though I do know now. It's in a way more painful because I know what I lost. And she does as well. And the reality is that we are now separated. I don't know how many kilometers, but at least 9 hours time difference and 14 hours from Zurich. So whereas I'm happy and grateful, I think I hope to have some kind of closure and peace of mind. And I'm really sorry to say that for me at least, that is really not the case. It's just another chapter. It's another layer. It's another way of grieving, even though we know each other. And I do realize how fortunate I am, but it's not easier. And I think I expected that. I think I thought I was entitled to that, but it's not. It's just different. So yeah, and it's great to be able to talk to fellow adoptees, because another thing that I find really hard is to hear from even my closest friends, oh, you had such a nice vacation. Oh, the weather was so nice. Oh, you look so funny in your handbag. We are not used to seeing that. It just is very hurtful. And it just, yeah, I don't blame them, but I'm finding that there is a very small group that we can share these kinds of experiences with, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories like yours as well through sharing my own story. There's been a lot of adoptees who have told me that as well. So you're definitely not alone in this feeling. There's actually Facebook groups even where they have adoptees in reunion. I don't know if you know that, but you can look it up, or I can share it with you maybe in the chat. Because I've recognized that as well. Like, even though I've been on this search, for my mother, like, I know that it's only the start of another journey then if I found her, because it's true. You end up in another grieving process, because you have to, I did that with my father as well, even though it wasn't a good meeting and, I ended up not having anything to be able to do with him, but it was a grieving process still of letting go of the fact that I could never do that, even though maybe he didn't want to even. So it was a double rejection and, the grieving of the fact that you could never have that.
What I also really relate to is your feeling of anger towards Korea.
Yeah.
It drove me away there in 2005. I literally had to leave like urgently because I was so upset with the government.
Yeah.
And to come back 16 years after and having to hear that it really hasn't changed that much.
Yeah.
The anger is not gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is very hurtful. I also stayed at Coburg and I spoke to the people there, and things are changing, but ever so slowly. And even today, children are being adopted out of Korea. And that just breaks my heart.
I think one of the best things I learned during my last trip there was, we're always told to be grateful since we're young because we've been adopted, right? And for the first time, because I hated that, I'd get so angry when people would tell me this, especially in the last few years. But I have to say, the last time I was there, it was the first time that I felt it myself, but not because people were telling me that, but because I truly felt it myself, that I was grateful to have not, in the end, been raised in that country. And not because I hate Korea, I have to say, I don't hate it. There's many things I love about it. And I feel I'm a bit of a world citizen now, because, a Korean I know was asking me just yesterday, actually, like, where do you call home? Where do you feel is home, And I told him, I said, on the Beethovenstraat in my house, that's where I feel at home. It has nothing to do with which country. It has nothing to do with other family members, but it's my own family. That's the only place I feel home, is right here in my house. And I was finally, just because of all the things that I had confronted and the stigmatisms and the fact that things, you know, in these Asian countries of the patriarchy and all of those issues, they are so slow to change and haven't changed in the amount that I would like to see, obviously. That it made me finally thankful for just the fact that I could be able to be the person I am and be able to be accepted for who I am and have the family that I do and have the lifestyle that I do, but not because I was adopted. Because I have made that life for myself now. And I can appreciate Korea now for the makeup, for the shopping, for the food, for the Korean dramas. But outside of that, I appreciate the fact that I can live in this European country and not also only be seen as an adoptee, because I think that label can also be very heavy as well. And you sometimes just want to shed it, right? Because you carry this with you, I think, for the rest of your life. But to be seen as that every single day is difficult. And even if in Korea yourself, you can be a bit invisible in the sense of blending in because people look like you, and you probably have this in China as well. But you're still, in the end, seen as not fitting in. And we're here, at least, you know, I make my own place, and it doesn't matter. And so that's the part that I've become grateful for, I think. But it's a journey, and I know that the reunion journey is a whole nother story in and of itself, and it's very difficult. And also, how do you maintain a relationship, you know, when there's such a huge language barrier, and then you're expected to learn Korean, you know?
I'm so unsuccessful.
It's very difficult.
Oh, I'm so unsuccessful. I studied with a Dutch teacher in the Leiden University, and I got my A1 level, and then I went to Seoul, and I could practice none of it. It's probably an emotional barrier, but this is very disappointing. Yeah.
Anyone else have any? I have a question, or something I always wonder about is why we search for our birth mothers more often than we search for our birth fathers. And I, you know, in your case, Kara, having searched for your birth father and found him has given you recognition, whereas, you know, the forced recognition in Korea, because it comes from the father's side. Whereas if you had found your mother first, would you have continued to search for your birth father or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I never had even thought about searching for him. I don't know, to be honest, because my mother was always the focus. I think because we're always told that, you know, our single mothers couldn't afford to take care of us and they couldn't raise us, and that's why they had to abandon us. So that was always kind of the story that justified the case that, you know, I was abandoned. But of course, later when I found out that, you know, my file, everything in it is pretty much false, that my age isn't correct. I'm actually probably a year older, according to a pediatrician in Korea. My father was very wealthy. He was not poor. And it's probably the traditional story of him having an affair with a younger woman. And that didn't fit, obviously, into the traditional stories or the traditional society, what was accepted in Korea at that time, or even, I mean, if you look at America and Europe as well, back in the 50s, that wasn't either, but in Korea it was even in the 80s, that case. So, yeah, I don't know if I would have pursued him, maybe, but I was really after my mother. But I have to say, since it happened in this way, I think it was because it's such a patriarchal country. I think in that sense, even if my mother could never have fought for that, even if she was wrong in the sense of having an affair with a married man, or maybe she didn't even know, at least I felt like I did something then for her and I then. Yeah. And I know, I received a lot of criticism actually as well, because I filed this paternity suit and because there was so much media coverage, and I've been accused of everything from, now instigating abortions, or instigating families to separate, or instigating mothers and birth families not to come forward anymore to meet their children because they're going to be afraid of being sued. But obviously that was never my intention. It was just another step in my search journey. And I never imagined or thought of what kind of effect it would have. And I really would regret if this does affect other adoptees' journeys and search journeys. And I truly would be sorry. But I have to say for myself, at least in my story and my journey, that I'm very proud of the fact that I could fight for her and fight for myself, even if she would have never done that, because that's not in her culture. I don't believe that just because I'm Korean that I should fall to the Korean cultures and norms. I was sent away. They can't expect me to follow their cultures and norms because I'm not created that way. And they have to accept that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I spent many years in Japan and they expected me to be Japanese. It's like, so not either one of those things. So, yeah. Okay, well, we're up on the time. Does anyone have any final questions or comments? Okay, so thank you so much, Kara, for sharing your story, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to host this event with you. And thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at another Universal Asian event. And that's it.
Yeah, and you can contact me on Instagram or Facebook if you want any more information. I just put it on the chat. Oops, sorry. Thank you.